Hi, everybody. This is Lisa Haven, and I've got a quick information for you today, and that is NASA 2015 predictions will drop your jaw to the floor. Mini ice age, numerous death, earthquakes, riots. What? So much for global warming. Now we're back to global cooling, or excuse me, climate change. It seems that they cannot get their stuff together. First it's cooling, then it's global warming. Now we're back to global cooling. And oh, now they're just going to title it climate change. What a ridiculous title. First off, for starters, climate change has been around forever. We've had major periods of cooling. We've had major periods of warming. This is not uncommon. This is just your regular changes of climate. But let's get into these shocking predictions made by a NASA climatologist, John Casey, who says that we could hit, so to speak, a freezing mini ice age with lots of death. Let's dive in. All right, so here we are on newsmax.com, and we have our headline. And it says, climatologist 30-year cold spell to strike the earth, basically. So this is something that they are predicting coming up. Here we are still in 2014. With NASA cold fronts thrusting an icy and early winter across the continental U.S., along with last winter described by U.S. Today as one of the snowiest, coldest, most miserable on record, climatologist John L. Casey thinks the weather pattern is here to stay for decades to come. In fact, Casey, a former space shuttle engineer and NASA consultant, is out with a provocative book, Dark Winter: How the Sun is Causing a 30-Year Cold Spell, which warns that a radical shift in global climate is underway and that Al Gore and other environmentalists have it completely wrong. The Earth, he says, is cooling and cooling fast. And unless the scientific community and political leaders act soon, cold, dark days are ahead. Okay, so there you have it. Let's keep going. Casey says the evidence is clear that the Earth is rapidly growing colder because of diminished solar activity. He says trends indicate we could be headed for colder temperatures similar to those seen in the late 1700s and early 1800s when the sun went into a solar minimum, a phenomenon which significantly reduced solar activity, including solar flares and sunspots. Let's just pause for a second. First of all, they admit that this has happened before. Okay, like I said, it's not the whole climate change lie. This has happened in history's past and it will happen again. It's nothing different than what we already have. Now, does that mean that we shouldn't take this particular information seriously? No. No. We need to take, when somebody up in NASA is telling us prepare, have a heads up, maybe this is coming, and he's warning that we could see major cold spells or major freezing points, or so to speak, a mini ice age in our near future, that could happen. I'm not saying it isn't. I'm saying it could very well happen. I don't know if it will because I'm not a NASA agent. I'm just repeating what they're claiming, okay? But I've also, there's all stuff on all spectrums, but this is a warning from him. And if it does happen, it won't happen because of climate change. It will happen because it's just the way the climate is. There are changes in climate all the time, and we go through certain spells just like he showed here in the 17 and 1800s. We could hit that again. Now, if he's right about this, because it has happened in history's past, that would be very bad news. Dark winter persists that a 30-year period of cold has already begun. Frigid temperatures and the food shortages and the inevitability result could lead to riots and chaos. In other words, if we get this winter, we could have food shortages. And as a result of food shortages, you'll have riots and chaos breaking out. This is why I constantly tell you guys to store up on food. Get extra food when you go to the grocery store. Just, and cycle through it, or go and buy bulk food storage, whatever you need to do. Now, Casey tells Newsmax all you have to do is trust natural cycles and follow the facts And that leads you to the inevitable conclusion that the sun controls the climate and that a new cold era has begun. There you have it in his own words. It's not about climate change and, oh my gosh, the world is dying. It's about cycles, patterns, history. Let's go on. Casey is president of the Space and Science Research Corp, an Orlando, Florida climate research firm. His new book debunks global warming orthodoxy. For more than a decade, he reports the planet's oceans have been cooling, and since 2007, the atmospheric temperatures have been cooling as well. The data is pretty solid, Casey says. If you look at the 100-year global temperature chart, you look at the steep drop off we've had since '07. It's the steepest drop in global temperatures in the last 100 years. So how can the media and scientific elite make a case for global warming when it is actually, you guessed it, cooling? Casey suggests climate change theorists have simply weeded themselves to the wrong theory, namely the global temperatures respond to the level greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Going on, any scientist suggesting otherwise is castigated as a heretic, though there are other prominent scientists who support Casey. Noted Russian astrophysicist, and I can't pronounce his name, has argued that a new mini ice age has begun, though Casey doesn't go that far. So he doesn't technically call it a mini ice age. That's what I like to call it. It's just a freezing period. But this particular astrophysicist is claiming it to be a somewhat of a mini ice age. He does agree with him that the real driver of global climate is solar activity, namely sunspots. These corresponds to shifts in global temperature with a greater than 90% accuracy, he says. So if we go off the history of the solar activity and sunspots, they have a 90% accuracy rate. And this is what Casey and this Russian astrophysicist are going off of. All right, moving on. And he goes on, if dark winter is right, that means the nation is busy preparing for the wrong calamity. We don't have 10 years, Casey warns. We've squandered during President Obama's administration 8 years, and we don't have 8 years to squander. The worst of the cooling cycle, Casey predicts, will hit in the late 2020s and the early 2030s. Food riots will break out, demand for heating oil will spike, and the failure of the corn crop will put the squeeze on ethanol. He even predicts the U.S. will ban agriculture exports to feed its own citizens. When Casey developed his theory in 2007, he emerged with several predictions. Rising temperatures would begin to reverse themselves within 3 years. The sun would enter a phase of reduced activity he called solar hibernation, and oceanic and atmospheric temperatures would enter a long decline. So far, all of Casey's predictions have come true. This is what I think why we should take his particular ones, as a heads up, a true heads up. He says, my theory tells you when it will be cold, and it is the cold that kills. Casey also suggests that a long-term cold spell will have dire effects on the Earth's geology. As air and ocean temperatures cool, the Earth's crust begins changing, leading more to volcanic activity and earthquakes. That's another thing he warned, okay? If all this stuff is going to happen, we're going to get an increase in volcanoes, not only volcanoes, but earthquakes. Casey notes that the worst earthquake to strike the U.S. in modern times was in 1812 in the New Madrid, Missouri. During the last great, solar minimum, that was during the 17 and 1800s. During that time, we had one of our largest or one of a worst strikes on the New Madrid in Missouri. This is why he is warning. He looks to history. The climate changes also will affect human activity and may be a prelude to revolutionary politics. He says the French Revolution took place at the beginning of the last solar minimum in 1789. And he closes, it could be one of the reasons Putin is so eager to get Ukraine. Okay, Casey says. For many decades before Ukraine became independent, it was the primary source of wheat for the Soviet Union during the cold weather times. Putin must have the wheat of Ukraine for a new cold era. That makes a lot of sense to me. Why is he attacking Ukraine? For the wheat. Okay, get that. That's a good point. Kerry has a worried look as he talks about the revelations in Dark Winter. There is no human on earth, much less here in the US, who has experienced the depth and duration of cold we're about to experience. It's that serious. And that's where he ends. And here's where you can get his book if you want to read it. But what I find interesting is the fact that some of his predictions have already come to pass, so to speak, or the things that he had predicted based off patterns and history. So it's just something to think about and have a heads up for. I don't know what will happen in the future. Nobody does. But we can look to history's past to determine what we could see in the future based off events. And I believe this is what he is doing. Anyhow, I wanted to bring you guys that. This is Lisa Haven signing off.